Hi, you're listening to Irish Stew, the podcast for the global Irish nation. I'm Martin Nutty, and together with my co-host John Lee, we're working to bring all the Irish together, whether you're hyphenated or not. We'll be talking to Irish people of excellence about their lives, what they do, their successes and failures, and how they relate to that small green rock off the coast of Europe. If you like what we're doing in this space, please remember to subscribe to Irish Stew, and even better, leave a rating and review on your favorite podcast platform.
Welcome to Irish Stew and another serving of the global Irish conversation. I'm John Lee. For today's episode, we're going to zoom across the pond to London to speak with an actor, theatrical producer, creator of cultural programming, and voiceover artist who divides her time among her native home in Ireland, her cultural pursuits in London and New York, Alison McKenna. But before we take that transatlantic trip, let's head across town from the west side to the east side and bring in the co-host of Irish Stew, Martin Nutty. Martin, good to talk. It's been a while. Last time we were talking was during our online launch party. Any thoughts coming out of that event?
Hey, John, good to be back with you again and on the Irish Stew. And I was really gratified to see how well the launch party went. Was delighted to have a number of different guests on, which included Emer Friel of the Irish Consulate, Andre Archibald, that was kind enough to act as an interviewer of both you and me. So we kind of flipped roles for a change. Of course, I had my niece on, Rosa Nutty, to do a musical number, and she did a real nice job with Austin McBride. And then finally, I was really thrilled to see that we actually had 60 people that were willing to come online and give us feedback and let us know that what we're doing is valuable to this global Irish nation that we're building. I have to add, who could forget that nice little video that you dropped of the inimitable Josh Prey?
Josh Prey, he's the guy who fell in love with the Gaelic Athletic Association, with hurling and Gaelic football. And I've got in touch with him, and maybe, Martin, we can get him for a full episode sometime. We really better be ready for that one because that man is high energy.
Absolutely.
Well, let's get right into today's episode and open the line to our guest, Alison McKenna. Today, we head to London to speak to Alison McKenna, an actor, theatrical producer of cultural programming, and a voiceover artist, and also a citizen of global Ireland with a career and connections in Ireland, the UK, and the USA. Welcome, Alison.
Thanks so much, John. Thanks, Martin.
Now, I know you've had a conversation already with my partner, Martin, but Martin, let's give a warm welcome to Alison.
Hey, Alison, great to have you on here. And obviously, John, but our paths haven't crossed to date. So I usually like to play the what I call the 2 degrees of separation Irish-style game. And I don't have a lot of contact in your world, but I do have a family relation that is no longer with us that you probably have heard of. Have to be, I guess, of a certain age. His name was Joe Lynch, and he's probably best known for playing one of the lead characters in Glen Roe. So I am guessing you probably encountered some of those people that he at least acted with if you didn't encounter him in person.
Well, I
Gabriel
certainly...
Byrne is one that jumps to mind,
I certainly know the name extremely well, as would every Irish television watcher. I never worked directly with him, but I did a stint on Fair City, and it's a small enough world, but a hugely reputed and respected Irish actor.
Yeah, he was an interesting character. So he's actually married to my aunt. He's not a blood relative, and what I would describe as a force of nature, although he never ever seemed to stop performing. So any family event, there was a full-on scale Joe Lynch show going all the time. So he'd sing, he'd act, he'd dance, he'd do whatever was necessary. He liked the spotlight.
I thought you were going to say TP McKenna, because when I was a young actor, the opening gambit. I was very lucky to be in wonderful companies of really super actors, and invariably somebody would come up and say, "Are you any relation to Siobhan McKenna?" And I go, "No." And they go, "Are you any relation to TP McKenna?" And I go, "No." And they'd be gone like dust, trailing in their midst. And years later, I got to know TP McKenna, and I worked with him on a lovely film called The American with Matthew Modine. And I was telling him this story, and he said to me, "If it's ever of any advantage to you, you're to tell them we are very much related." So that's the generosity of Irish actors for you.
It kind of begs the question of genealogical exploration necessary to bind that relationship a bit tighter, since you share the last name at least.
I think it's like the John Waters book, Jiving at the Crossroads, where we work out not 2 degrees of separation. It's probably just half a degree. It's a very Irish thing to want to know where you're from, where you come from, who your people are. That's just very Irish. That's who we are, trying to join all the dots as quickly as we can.
Well, I follow a similar theory with Barack Obama, whose Irish ancestor's name was Carney, and that's one of my grandparents, Carney. So we're cousins until proven otherwise. And I don't want to hear anything to the contrary. Alison, just trying to think back how we met, and I'm guessing it was at the Irish consulate for a First Friday breakfast, something along those lines.
That's correct, John. Yeah.
And then our paths continue to cross, and I know you lived in my neighborhood for a while.
I did, the Upper West Side in New York. Absolutely loved our years there. Fantastic.
Well, just when you were talking with Martin, you mentioned your early days in the theater. Let's kind of go back there. I know you had mentioned to me that you don't come from a theatrical family. How did you find your way into it? What gave you the bug to get into acting and theater?
So I often say I fell into it. I was about 10 years old when we moved house from the suburbs in Dublin into Donnybrook. And for my sins at the time, I used to do a tap dance class once a week. And we moved in, and there wasn't a tap dance class to be found anywhere near us. But there was a woman who taught drama to young students called Betty Ann Norton. And if you are remotely in the acting industry, you'll be so aware of who Betty Ann was. She ran a terrific school. She just passed away this year, actually, only a few months ago. And the amount of Irish actors who came through her that you would know, it was just amazing. So I took myself off on a Thursday afternoon on the 46A into town. I'd do an hour of drama and come home again. And within a few months of that, a wonderful Irish casting director called Nuala Moiselle used to come to Betty Ann looking for young actors. And I ended up auditioning for something, and 2 recalls later, and I didn't really know what it was at all, but I just turned up and did the lines in front of the camera, and I came home and I just said, I think I have a part in a film. And so I did. I had a very nice part in a film for Channel 4. And the following summer, I did another film and a commercial, and I did The Crucible for the National Youth Theatre. And that was it. And I think, looking back, I loved it all. But one of the things that I really loved, and it was very simple, really, but actually your call is so early in the morning. You'd be picked up at 6 or 7 a.m. So you'd be up at 5:30 or 6 and being picked up and driven through the streets of Dublin in that peace and quiet, going to work on a script and a nice part in a film. I have to say, I sat in those cars and thought, this is the life. This is what I would love. If I get paid for this, it's an added bonus, but I'll do this for as many years as I can. And that's how it began. But it wasn't a sense of I want to be an actor. I want to, go headlong into this industry. And in fact, on that job, I was really lucky. I worked with an Irish actress who a lot of your listeners will know, an amazing actress, Derval Malloy, several times Tony nominated actress, and does an awful lot of work with you there on Broadway. And she became, I suppose at the time, the age gap was so big that she played my aunt in the film. But so at that point, she was sort of my mentor. And she said, if you want to become an actor, if that's what you do want to do, you need to go and train. So I applied to Trinity College at the ripe old age of, I think 17, and I got accepted by interview. And I went into Trinity within a couple of months of my 18th birthday. And it was a 2-year course. So I was done by the age of 20 and out in the big bad world. And then I worked with Derval again at the RSC. on a play with them, and then over the years we've become firm friends. But that's kind of how the trajectory of all of that worked. So it was a seed that was sown when I was 16 years old, really, and the path was thankfully laid down.
I think that that image of the limo ride through quiet Dublin, that would have sold me on the.
Well, now, John, it wasn't a limo. This is Dublin after all.
Come on,
it was, whatever it was absolutely delightful. I'd kind of go, "Oh no, don't open the door. I can do that myself." But it was a very nice existence in the summer holidays for a 16-year-old.
Excellent.
No doubt about it. Yeah.
So, Alison, we on the Irish Stew, that's John and I, like to trace the arc of people's careers. And so what you're setting us up for, quite conveniently, is your origin story, obviously. But there's this transition. Like a lot of people get exposed to the performing arts as children. And then all of a sudden, you're in Trinity College and now you're on the doorstep of adulthood. So this is no longer a game. I'm not sure if you viewed it as a game, in your teenage years, or when did it suddenly become a plausible likelihood to be a full-time member of the performing arts world?
I think at that age I was totally passionate about being an actor. So the seeds were sown 16, 17 years of age in those summer times. I didn't take any time off school. There was none of this disappearing as soon as I got the opportunity into the profession. So for that, I'm very grateful. And Trinity College was the diploma in theatre studies, and a really wonderful course and very intense. And you would just go in. We were quite separate to the rest of the college in many ways, and we worked extremely long hours. And it was almost like an immersion for 2 years in theatre in terms of training the voice, the physicality, learning how to shed your own skin to take on other people's skin, learning empathy and awareness, and just how to read people so that you could take on those characters if and when you got the opportunity. So, I think I was very lucky in that this all happened at a time when I'm old enough to say that it happened at a time when most people didn't say, "Oh, I'll become an actor." So I remember going to the career guidance teacher and saying, "I'd like to become an actor and I'd like to study theatre." And she went, "Well, I don't have anything on that." So I said, "That's okay. Don't worry. I'll get on with it." But I did audition for one other drama school at the time, and that was RADA. And I, at that point, had left my drama class, and I was just, as you said, on the cusp of going from one thing to another. And I will never forget that I had to learn a monologue from The Way of the World for auditioning in RADA. And I really didn't have anyone to help me at that stage. And so what happened was that I lived next door to Muckross Park Convent School. And I went in, and in the parlour room of Muckross Park, one of the nuns rehearsed me through The Way of the World monologue by William Congreve. And I love the idea that, looking back, she and I worked through this speech. Then I packed a bag, came to London, stayed with Derval Malloy, and went into the audition. And I still remember the man who interviewed me. His name was John Deteen. His nephew is Joe Deteen. We later played regular roles in a series called Pie in the Sky, where Richard Griffiths was the leading character, a detective. And John sat me down and said, "You've done an awful lot of work, given your age, but you're incredibly young. You need to go back and come back to us in a year or two, and we'd love to have you, but you're too young." So I went home and went, "Where is that page for Trinity College?" And I applied to Trinity. And then I applied for 2 courses, the drama degree and the theatre diploma. I did interviews for both. I got offered places on both. One of them was drama, which was the non-acting course I eventually got offered German. And I thought, God, no point in studying German for 3 years, little thinking that I would be married to a German about 15 or so years later, and it might have been of use to study German for a little while longer. But I took the theatre course. So when I came out, I'd sort of worked out at an early stage that I had a huge appetite to do this. So that's what I wanted to do. So you talk about the transition into when did it become a serious venture, but I think I was a very serious teenager, and I didn't take anything lightly. So I think I just continued that path, and I wrote to the Abbey Theatre. So I have somewhere stashed at home in the family home, I have they're short letters back from almost every artistic director in the Abbey Theatre for a whole decade of me writing and saying, I'd like to come and be on your stage someday. And I got various responses from, stay in school, finish your exams, we'll see you in good time. And then I would have written at about the time that Gary Hines took over the Abbey Theatre, and I got an opportunity to come and audition for a play called The Patriot Game, who Tom Murphy wrote. And I think over the course of my career, I've done 6 or 7 plays by Tom, and eventually I produced him as well, and produced a play that he directed called The Sanctuary Lamp for London and Ireland. And I remember doing The Patriot Game and thinking, this is the beginning. Now, it was Glasgow, it wasn't the Abbey stage, but within a short period of time, a couple of years later, I ended up doing Moses Rock, and that was a leading role on the Abbey stage. And the Abbey, to me, and still to me, is my alma mater. I worked and did 13 leading roles for them over quite a number of years, and I grew up on that stage in many years, in many ways, and over several years I was rarely off it. And that, I think, will always be the centre of it for me. But I don't think that there was a huge transition. I did a little film called Bossa Nova Blues by a wonderful director called Kieran Walsh. It was his graduating film from the Royal College of Art in London. And I thoroughly enjoyed making that. It was up in Blackpool in a fairground. It was set with an actor at the time called Justin Chadwick, who's gone on to become a fantastic TV director. And suddenly this film won a lot of awards. And I was kind of astonished, not because I didn't see why the work wasn't good and why it shouldn't win awards, but it was another world I didn't know. So I turned up to the Cork Film Festival, and Kieran's agent asked who represented me. So I went to see her, and I spoke to her, and I was dying to be on her books because I thought if she was my agent, it would all be grand. And she said, that's all very nice and you've done very well. And well, let me know when you're in something and I can come and see it. And I remember leaving the building in Covent Garden kind of going, oh my God, what was that? And I got home, and in those days, there weren't iPhones. There were telephone boxes on the corners of streets. There were answering machines, if you were lucky, where you were living. And I got home into my little flat in London, and the light was beeping, and I played it. And it said, hello, Alison. Very nice to meet you today. The National Theatre in London are looking for a 17-year-old for Night of the Iguana. Now, I can't represent you, but there is a script at the stage door if you'd like to collect it. So I got on the train straight back into the centre of London, went to the National Stage door, picked up that script and took it home. And Night of the Iguana is a wonderful play. And Tennessee Williams has always been a huge icon for me. I love all of his work. I found the journey of the man extraordinary. I loved him. And I studied the role of Charlotte in Night of the Iguana for as many days as I could before the audition. And I went in, and at that time, Serena Hill was head of casting at the National Theatre. And she met me in the canteen, and we read a couple of pages together. And she said, okay, could you just wait here and I'll see if Richard could see you. Richard was Richard Eyre, who was at that time running the National Theatre. And I remember thinking, oh my God, I'm going to meet Richard. Right. I hadn't quite bargained on that. So I started praying that I just didn't make an idiot of myself. I thought that would be fine if I just didn't make an idiot. So Serena came back and collected me, and we went up to the top level in the National Theatre in London and into Richard's office. And he was delightful. And it was full of manuscripts and Olivier Awards. And it was just so exciting. And we sat down. He's a really quiet, gentle man, fiercely intelligent, and just a wonderful person. And we read together, and he said, yes, okay, well, we'll let you know. And as far as I was concerned, the agent in Covent Garden had said, we'll let you know. And a few other people had said, we'll let you know. So without thinking, I just said, typical. And he said, excuse me. And I said, well, the actors are always the last people to know. You'll have hired the set designer, the costume designer, the lighting designer. If you were doing Hamlet, he'd be waiting to know. And Richard just sort of looked down, and he looked up and he said, well, would you like to do it? And I said, excuse me. And he said, well, would you like to play Charlotte? And I said, are you offering me the job? And he said, I am. And I said, of course I would. So I leapt up and hugged Serena, because obviously I wasn't going to hug Richard. And I left the National Theatre. And I had to find a phone box, and I put the money into the phone box, phoned the agent in Covent Garden, and said, I just want to let you know that went very well and I'm doing it. So, there was no, when does it become an adult game? That didn't exist because I took the whole thing so seriously. But when I walked out of that building that day and I realised that I had a 9-month contract with the National Theatre in London, Richard Eyre directing, by Tennessee Williams, with Alfred Molina, Eileen Atkins, Francis Barber, Robin Bailey. I mean, I often think of a wonderful book of photography that was made for Richard later. And there's a picture of Imelda Staunton, and her quote about him is, "My life had begun." And that for me was just an extraordinary moment. And I thank to my lucky stars.
Oh, that's a fantastic story. And, there's luck involved, but there's a lot going on there besides luck, as you were able to kind of turn the corner with him by just kind of coming back at him in an unexpected way. I was thinking, Alison, as I kind of got ready for this, of, what the actor does. And you have so many great words, great prose, great dialogue that you have to kind of incorporate, and you have to interpret. And I just wonder, do these lines, these passages, do they come back to you? Do they come to you at odd moments? Is there a favorite passage you could share with us now?
Definitely not. I'd be on top salary for that, John.
How about from the monologue? Do you remember the monologue that you started the story with?
Not at all. No. So, but it's a very good question, because I do think we carry shades of characters. I do. So part of your job as an actor is that, and it's the bit that I love most, is losing me. You have to find over the years a core sense of yourself, so you know who to return to when you put away the scripts and the run is over at the theatre. But it is about taking on another personality, and it is about looking for the clues of that. So with an amazing writer, which we have in Ireland, Frank McGuinness, Tom Murphy, there's Arthur Miller, there's so many just superb playwrights. And if you're lucky enough to have their material, then they've really written a piece for orchestra, in that every character is an instrument and every instrument delivers. And when that all plays in harmony, and the audience is an integral part of that orchestra as well, they are also an instrument. So when that play finally comes together in front of an orchestra, if the libretto is being performed properly, then the whole thing comes to a crescendo and lifts together and transcends the experience for the audience. And that's why when you go to the theatre and you have the very best of times, you have left behind all your cares and thoughts of the day, because you have been wholly consumed into a different world. So as an actor, in order to allow that journey to happen, you have to leave your ego at the door of the rehearsal room and yourself at the door of the rehearsal room, and you look with the director and the other actors for the paths that forge that journey of the character. And you have to be brave and just say, you have to try things out, and you have to know that part of it is failure. So you'll try things and go, well, that doesn't work, or you'll look for clues in the text. And then there are characters that you will have loved that just sit within you. When you're a young actor, you'll get cast because you are young, or because I often think that I did my first job at the Gate Theatre in Dublin, Jane Eyre. I played the very young Jane Eyre and Adele. And another actress had dropped out. And I'm not kidding when I say I think I was cast because I fitted the dresses. I think it was quite close to rehearsals. But, that's just another word for opportunity, frankly. So I did fit the dresses and I had a great time. But I do think that there was a time in my 20s when I would have worked endlessly, and from one theatre job to another, and often you'd be rehearsing during the day and performing at night. And you have to learn to take on things, and you have to learn to shed them. Because if you don't shed them, then over a period of time, then who do you become? And anyone who performs in the arts will tell you that the strongest suit that you bring to anything is yourself at the beginning of it, and then you take on others. But if you give everything away, what are you left with? So, you already work in an industry that demands an awful lot of you. So when the 8-show week has ended and you're back at home on a Saturday night, and it's if you haven't gone out for a glass of wine or a bite to eat and you're back in your apartment, who are you? So you have to have a very strong sense of who you are, so that when you turn around and take on a completely different character another 4 or 5 weeks later, you'll be able to do that. But I do think it's a line from the Dead. It's in the final passage about shades passing. And I do think of characters like that. I think that once they have been created into the ether, there's a residue of them somewhere.
So that's wonderful. I'm going to switch gears a little bit and ask you about one of the things we like to talk about in the stew is kind of Irishness and how that's defined. You, like me, are an expat at the moment. I grew up in Ireland as a Jew. You're in London. I'm in New York. And I'm just curious, and I know you spent time in New York, and I'm just curious as to where you put your hyphen in Irish. In other words, you could be Irish American, you could be Anglo-Irish, you could be Irish. And how does location inform your work? Does it make a difference? I think of great artists, especially in the literary arts, like James Joyce, who you just kind of refer to, obviously, with the Dead, writing his best work when he was an expatriate. Does it make a difference from your perspective?
So I'm definitely an Irish American. Because of all my years in America, I am a bona fide American citizen now, which is fantastic. Thank you very much. So I'm really proud of that. I mean, when we moved to America, quite a long time ago now, we moved to New York. I can't tell you how much I took to American life and New York life. I just absolutely loved it. Now, I'm not completely naive. I know that Irish people have and get an extremely warm welcome. And one of the things that I used to do a lot was go to the consulate to the first Friday of each month to the breakfast, and I met my own community there. And I was so touched because it was the consul general there at that time was so welcoming.
Noel Kilkenny.
Noel and Honora.
Yes.
And
Honora, yeah. Wonderful people.
Noel and Honora Kilkenny welcomed us so warmly. So I had been in London before going to New York, and Ambassador Bobby McDonough had very kindly offered to make an introduction for us to New York. Basically, he had come to the opening of The Sanctuary Lamp by Tom Murphy that was directed by Tom Murphy in London, and he really enjoyed the work. And we'd stayed in touch, and I told him that we'd got green cards and we were America bound, and he made that introduction. And Noel, really, it was wonderful how wonderfully he opened the doors for us, and we got invited to several things and were very quickly accepted and welcomed into the Irish community, which is where I met you, John. So I would say that one thing, given that I'm at a ripe old age at this stage, I've never changed my accent. I've never changed it. I remember very vividly running into a lovely actor on the South Bank in London who was quite elderly when I was in my early 20s, and I said I was Irish, and he flipped in 1 second to another from what I thought was basically an Oxbridge accent, RP English accent, into his Irish accent. And he said that he had come to England at a time when it was more advantageous to him to sound like an English person. So he did that. And in that moment, and not as a judgment of him, I found it very, very moving. But I also thought, my voice is who I am, and I need to be me. I pretend to be other people on stage all the time, or when I interpret lots of stuff, but I need to be me. So I've always kept my voice. So no matter where I've lived, for a long time in England, they wouldn't necessarily be familiar with my version of an Irish accent, but the Commitments was going strong at the time, and I didn't sound like I'd fallen out of the Commitments. But so this was me. So in London, I mean, there's so many Irish people here, you just fitted right in. And then in New York, I couldn't get over the welcome. And interestingly, when I went, I wasn't sure what how I would get out the door to work in New York, if I'm honest. I had done an awful lot of work with the Abbey Theatre in Ireland. We had a very young child. I wasn't entirely sure that, if I'm going to be terribly frank, I wasn't sure that I wasn't too old for New York to arrive and to be working as an actor. And by that stage, I was already producing. I had set up a theatre company with an Irish actress friend called Jane Brennan, and we had it for 10 years, and it was Arts Council funded, and we produced premieres of people like Michael Frayn, Terry Johnson, Frank McGuinness, Tom Murphy, as I mentioned, and we did really, really exciting work. So when I went to New York, we were rapidly approaching, it was a few years before 2016, but we were rapidly, in terms of planning and developing, approaching the centenary commemoration of 1916. And I decided that I would really like to try and do a project around that. But I was not interested in getting involved in the politics, because I grew up in a country that had enough, that went on every day in the newspapers, even though we were just 150 miles south of Belfast. By the time I came to London, there was still an awful lot of activity going on over there, and there were a lot of bomb scares and the occasional bomb. And that's left me with a residue of, I'll avoid sort of war and conflict at any stage. I mean, I fully accept that 1916 was about Ireland asserting her independence and finding her independence. And I think that that was integral to our development as a country, and it was time. But when it came to marking the 100 years, I felt that it wouldn't really be my forte to be stuck in the middle of the politics of it. So what I decided to do was to look at the journey of the Irish artist over 100 years. And for me, you talk about how Irishness felt abroad. Well, actually, even though there's an awful lot of people in New York who are newly arrived from Ireland, there is equally, after 9/11, when the Canadian border closed down, there's a lot of people who perhaps haven't left as frequently as they might have done. And in actual fact, if you take the 100 years of Ireland from 1916 to 2016, there has been an extraordinary amount of progression in terms of, same-sex marriage, repeal the eighth. We have evolved into a very progressive nation. And there are times in New York when I felt that the blueprint of Ireland that was still a reference was not necessarily the blueprint that I would have experienced as an Irish person who was still back several times a year to work in Ireland, or who had been living in the UK. So I took the journey of that 100 years through music, through photography, through theatre, through poetry, and through literature, and showed the journey of artists during that time, and to where it had taken us to. And in fact, the final section of that, so I did it in association with the Irish Consulate, the New York Public Library, Lincoln Center, and the Irish Repertory Theatre Company, and also the American Irish Historical Society, who I was really lucky to have amazing partners. I went to them and asked them individually would they come on board, and they said yes. So I worked together to present what I thought was showing a side of Ireland that would reflect where we had been and where we were journeying towards. And the last evening, it was only really 5 or 6 weeks of events. They were all free. I wanted anybody who had interest in seeing or hearing about these projects, I wanted them to be fully available to the public. I love the art in New York, and I also found it very expensive to go to if I was there. I mean, I'm a great believer in supporting the arts financially at every turn, but I didn't want money to be a reason for people not to turn up. So whenever I got involved with an association, I would say, let's see if we can find the sponsorship or the funding. And Culture Ireland funded a lot of the project so that we could make it fully available to the public. But the last event was about was 2 young writers. When I say young, I suppose they're maybe late 30s, early 40s, Liz Nugent and Danielle McLaughlin, who were both being published, very successful writers, but being published in a major way for the first time that year in America. And they were hosted by Richard Nash, who is a cousin of mine. I dragged in the cousin because he has... he's quite a big head in publishing and digital publishing in the US. And in the Lincoln Centre, there was an evening called No Country for Old Men. And it was actually more forward thinking than maybe we thought at the time, because it was about the female writers emerging. And then Waking the Feminists started in Ireland at about the same time. But I was really excited just to see those two writers. Danielle had articles published in the New Yorker, but her book has been published, as was Liz Nugent's. And for any Irish artist, making a real journey into America is just such an exciting prospect to open up that entire jurisdiction. So I must say that I found it very exciting to be part of showing a slightly different mirror of where we were at. And also I had just a couple of years prior to that, on hearing that I was coming to New York for a while, which ended up being quite a number of years, I did a weekend program with the New York Foundation for the Arts, which was about strengthening ties between Irish and American artists and institutions. And I ended up working with a whole group of mostly visual artists in Ireland, although there was a singer and a poet as well. And we'd just come through the crash of 2008. And nobody in Ireland had money to buy art, to buy music, to not as much money to go to the theatre. And artists had really been left high and dry. And it was just a 4-day workshop. But we forged our connections because we'd all been through, I suppose the crash of 2008 left such profound marks on everyone. And a few of them sort of said, "Oh, you're off to America. Do you think you might set up some kind of a thing for us to do there? And we could send over an exhibition." And that happened. I went to America and we set up a co-op called IDER, and the New York for Performing Arts, they get the New York Foundation for the Performing Arts gave us their site in Brooklyn for 4 months. And there was a whole art exhibition, and I performed a monologue, John, and there was a wonderful artist in it called now you've got to spot the bit now that might draw in your listeners' attention, called Rain Hozier Byrne. And she was an artist, and she said, quite close to the opening in Brooklyn, "My son is over that weekend. Do you think would it be of any interest for him to play a song or two?" And I was maybe not on the same wavelength as I should have been. And I went, "Who's he?" I didn't say that to her, thankfully. I said it to a man who I had bumped into at an opening in Brooklyn by the name of Paul Fahey, who runs the Galway Arts Festival. And I said, "Have you ever heard of Hozier?" And his head spun like an owl's head on its top. It came the whole way around and went, "Excuse me?" And I said, "Well, his mother's offered for him to come and sing a song or two when we open in Brooklyn on Friday." And Paul said, "Just say yes, say yes." So I'm sure I probably already said to Rain that we'd love to have him, but, and it wasn't my choice. We were a co-op, but I was running the American end of things. And the next thing is he was going to come and sing a song or two. But he was doing Saturday Night Live, I think, or the Letterman show within hours of being with us the following evening, I think. And his Sony executives had said that nothing could go on social media about him doing this performance. So I remember going to the breakfast at the consulate in New York, and at the end of it, there would always be any other business thing. Would anybody like to promote anything? And at that point, I said, "Yes, I'm involved with this group called IDER, and we've got something going on in Brooklyn for 4 months. And there's actually an opening on Friday week if anybody wanted to come." And I looked around the room, and I mean, everybody's busy in New York, and anybody who has a place outside of New York flees the city on Friday at 4:00, and the eyes were all dead. And I thought, this is interesting. And I said, and we've got a fella, he's going to do a couple of songs, we're really lucky, called Hozier. And I looked around the room, and the pupils did not move. They didn't do anything except for 2 young women. And I gave my speech, and people clapped and all the rest. And I walked away, and they came up and went, "Can we come?" And I said, "Well, you can." I said, "But of course, you can't tell anyone. You can't put it on your Facebooks or Instagrams, or you can't tweet this. But you, and I'll give you tickets for each of 2 of your friends, and that'll be you, and we'll see you Friday week." And it was amazing, because Hozier arrived, and by that point, I had become familiar with Take Me to the Church, because he was already a phenomenal star in Ireland. And he played off the cuff, and it was just it was a brilliant night. And we had at the time David Donahue was Ambassador David Donahue was the ambassador to the UN, and I had met David at one night at the theatre, and I told him what I was doing, and I suppose possibly again the introduction through Ambassador Bobby McDonough, but he said, would you need help opening the event in Brooklyn? And I said, are you offering to open it for us? And he said, well, if it suits for you. And I said, I'd absolutely love that. Himself and Jill Donahue are an amazing couple and were very much involved in the arts as university students, and they loved it. So we ended up with a small Irish collective with an exhibition for 4 months that was opened by the Irish ambassador to the UN, and Hozier performed. And the following night he was on Saturday Night Live or Letterman, and after that his songs played all over the radio all the time. And by the time the next consulate breakfast came around, people went, who did you say was playing at the opening of that thing? So, but that again was Irish artists showing their Irish work back to an American audience. And I think it was really interesting to look at that gap between those two concepts of how New York perceived Ireland at that time and how Ireland perceived itself. And it was fascinating.
If I'm tracking your career properly, it seems that experience in Brooklyn represented a transition from maybe a performing artist to more of a impresario, to use a rather grand word.
Well,
is that the case? Because a lot of performing artists don't go that line. They just want to perform, right?
Yeah.
This kind of calls for, more organizational ability, more business acumen, etc. So how did that leap occur?
So that's I often look back and think, when did I ever go to bed and sleep? When I went to London at the age of 19 or 20, I didn't know a soul, and I was actually very lonely. I was really lonely. I had no relatives in London. I had really no friends. And even though you did plays together, people had to go home out of London after work. So they didn't really hang around and socialise, even though I was sort of living the dream. So my uncle, the man called Richard Nash, and my mum's family, Nash's Mineral Waters and Red Lemonade, and they had a little office in London. So I went to work for them by day. And because I didn't particularly want Sundays off with nothing to do, I got myself a job in the shoe shop on the King's Road. So I did sales and marketing for Nash's. I played Charlotte in The Night of the Iguana, and I sold cowboy boots on a Sunday. And you're right, not many people do that. So, but actually I have to say I gave up on the cowboy boots. I wasn't very good at that bit. But I did enjoy seeing, there was a drink called Irish Spring, seeing it developed. And then I discovered that if you had the right product and you went to the right people, you could sell it to the right people. So at quite a young age, I'd managed to sell this drink, Nash's Irish Spring, into Waitrose in the UK and Sainsbury's. I got them proper listings in big, big supermarkets. And I just really, I enjoyed creating things. So then I worked as an actor, and I had no time to do anything else really, which was a joyous position to be in. But if I ever did have gaps, I'd go back to the mineral water. And then when I was in my mid-20s, I thought I might like producing. And, it was a complete disaster. It was a fiasco. It was a financial success, and everything else fell apart. And I remember coming out as if I'd been scorched by fire and thinking, I am never doing that again. And I just thought that, and we did a play called Licking the Marmalade Spoon at the Project Arts Centre in Temple Bar when Fiach McAneill was running the building, long before he ran the Abbey Theatre. And I remember going for a meeting with him saying, I have a bit of an idea about a friend who I thought might write a play for another friend. And we weren't really sure. And Fiach went, yes. And I went, okay, grand. And one of my favourite stories of that time is that one evening, lots of people turned up to support that play. And I mean, it was a disaster because a good friendship, we both came through it so badly that we never really properly built our bridges. And I thought I never want to do that again. But I remember the nuns from the convent next door going, what are you up to these days? And I said, well, actually, with a bit of bad planning, and because I didn't speak to my agent, I'm on stage in the Abbey performing in Moses Rock, but I've got a play that I'm producing down the road in the Project Art Centre that I'm terrified nobody will go to. And they said, don't worry, we'll turn up. So one night a taxi called to the convent in Muckross and 4 nuns came out, and the taxi driver said, ladies, where are you off to? And they said, we're off to Temple Bar. Off they went in their full habits and sat in the front row. So that finished, and I thought, I am never doing that again. And it was only 3 short years later when Jane Brennan and I met for a cup of tea, and she said, I'd love to do a play. I don't want to be hanging around waiting for anybody to ask me to go to work. And Jane worked a lot. I mean, she never stops working. You'll know her from Brooklyn. She plays Saoirse Ronan's mother, and she's an amazing actress. And I said, right, well, if you're going to be in it, I better do the producing end of things. So what would you fancy doing? And she said, well, I'd like to do Frank McGuinness's version of Electra. And I thought, okay. So we parted ways, and I rang her a couple of days later and I said, Jane, I've good news. I've got the rights to Electra. And she said, what? And I said, well, Frank McGuinness says we can do it. And she said, what? So she always said that she never, ever thought that I would leave the meeting and actually go and ring Frank and say, can I have the rights? So, you know, the transition was maybe doing the selling and the promoting of the mineral water and thinking, actually, you know, as an actor, if you haven't carried home an Oscar at the age of 21 and a half, you know, and actually also because times are changing, if you can, you should create your own work. And if there's anybody listening that is of an age when they're thinking of a career in the arts, then, you know, one of the things that actors really aspire to being is having a producer credit on their television series, on their theatre play. So actually, and if you go back and you look at people like Garrick, they were actor producers. It's not an unusual concept. It was just an unusual profession for my time coming through the business. And quite often people would say to me, like Jane and I met and we talked about Electra. We set up a company called Bespoke Theatre Company, and that became a 10-year Arts Council funded company. And we put an enormous amount of work into that. I mean, at the beginning, we licked the stamp seal, the envelopes, put out the chairs for the theatre, you know, and Riverdance were our backers at the very beginning. And by year 3, we had Arts Council funding. But we put a phenomenal amount of work into making that happen. But basically, it transferred all of my sort of I don't know if I'd go so far as to call them business skills, but all of the skills that I'd learned in parallel, I had decided that I would try and bring them all together. And that meant forming a company. And that's what Bespoke was. And then in 2010, like every other arts organisation in Ireland that didn't have a building, in the aftermath of the 2008 crash, we all lost our funding. I mean, overnight, we lost our funding. In that year, in 2010, we had gone into rehearsals with the Sanctuary Lamp to go to London. In January, we came to London, had a very successful run, hit a lot of the critics' lists, even though we were a tiny, tiny unknown quantity in London. We came back and did a national tour in Ireland, which ended up playing, the final nights were in the Galway Town Hall Theatre. And the actors had just finished 6 months of work and we got our letter saying no further funding. So, I mean, the country was in such dire straits. It was phenomenally upsetting. But if you can't open schools and hospitals, you know, I could on some level reconcile the fact that there were people ahead of us in the pile. But there was a huge cull of the arts in Ireland at that time. And I still don't know that fiscally it was the right decision. I think it cost more money to put people on unemployment benefit than it would have kept to have given them grants at a certain level over a couple of years. So when I came to America, I have produced theatre for a very long time, but I was also funded to produce theatre. So I never arrived at the door with a large checkbook going, let me just write the check and I'll put on a play. So when the structure of finance is so different in America, I could see that when I arrived, I had no idea how I would produce theatre. And then with the arrival of 2016 and a call out by Culture Ireland for projects at home and abroad to market, I saw an opportunity of producing in a different way. So would I call it being an impresario? Dear God, I don't think there was that level of strategy.
I'm not sure you dress for the part. The impresario has a certain,
I don't know.
a certain image.
The impresario to me has the image of a bit of a rat with a, kind of the highway rat with a big French hat and a feather. But, that, what was called Salonera 100, which was a project for New York and is still my Twitter handle, at a very early meeting with one of my associate producers during that journey of the planning for it, was with the Irish consulate in New York and the Consul General, Barbara Jones. And it was through that meeting that I ended up being the consultant producer to the Irish consulate and for the Centenary of 1916 for New York. And that was another brilliant journey. Yeah.
That was an amazing production, and you talked about the navigating politics. It was quite a day. As we get to the end of our time together here, you had sent, you were talking about the 2009, 2010 economic crash, and we're in a similar state now with COVID. And you shared some thinking with me, really just before we got on, about culture in the time of COVID. But I'd like to just grab one expression you used in that document. You talked about culture makers.
Yeah.
What's a culture maker? Are you one of them?
What I mean is, I don't just want to, point the finger or highlight a director or an actor. I think, like every good thing in life, there's so many elements. So when you look at theatre, you do see a lighting designer, a set designer, prop maker, stage manager, a producer. So I think that all of the elements need to come together. And I think we are in the middle of something that no one had any idea how to navigate it, such to the extent that when it happened in London, the escalation of COVID in March, we actually left for Ireland. I had concerns about how COVID was being handled here, and it looked to me that things weren't shutting down quickly enough. Ireland had already shut down, and I made the decision that we have a place there and that we would decamp, and my husband was able to work remotely, so that all worked. And when I got there, because of my experience and my position as an actor and a producer, I was able to sit in a lot of Zoom meetings looking at the Irish arts and how it was going to navigate this time. And it became clear to me in the middle of April, that there was going to be two things that were really required. One was the funding needed to be found to keep all the institutions and buildings going, because you simply couldn't let them go to the wall. But there was no question of people really turning up to attend those buildings anytime soon. I mean, the first meeting that I sat in on, they talked about doing A, B, C, yada, yada in July. And I said, and what are you going to do regarding the toilets? And they said, they'll be unisex and it'll be one in and one out. And I sat there and thought, and there endeth the whole prospect. Because you can't have a theatre interval with one in, one out and unisex and not cleaning things down. And you just can't do that in the middle of a pandemic, which is to do with hygiene. And I realised that the buildings would not be fit for purpose for quite some time. So I wrote a paper about culture in the time of COVID and how we might enable the public to get to culture, the culture makers. So I didn't want to restrict it to actors or performers. There's far too many people that the industry covers that it would be wrong to discount this at this time in our lives, because it is so critical. Like I refer at the end of that paper, I said, if the Book of Kells was burning, we would do everything within our fiscal ability to save it. But because somehow the Irish arts, there was a hiatus, there was a status of hiatus and no awareness of how or what to do, because COVID was such an unknown entity and we didn't know as much as we even know 6 months later as to how it would affect things. But I thought that we should have external stages that were drive-ins, that could have big screens, that would not just be for theatre. In the morning time, they could show kids cartoons. We've got a fantastic few Irish companies now, Cartoon Saloon, who are making great cartoons for kids. We could have writers socially distanced in the afternoon, interviewed by people or poets. You could have a singular musician, and that evening you could have socially distanced performances on stage. And there would be 3 stages, one for Dublin, one for Galway, one for Cork. They would be drive-ins where you have 4 people per vehicle, and then you literally do portaloos, is that the name of it for America? They're those temporary toilets that could be sprayed down with whatever chemicals it needed to make sure that there wouldn't be contamination, and that there would be no beverages sold on site, so that, you know, people would have to make an agreement as to how much they were outside their vehicles and for what purposes, and that they would have the ability to concertina in and out depending on what level the country was in and what stages we were at, and that it would somehow get us through the summer months, and by the autumn months they could become cinema stages, so that in the time of the year in Ireland where you wouldn't want to be outside, I mean, this would be a covered stage, but if it was too bleak and you couldn't possibly be performing on it, you could have cinema still, and they could be movable stages that could go around the country. They shouldn't be built to last more than 2 to 3 years, and they could be at the right times of the year absorbed into the Galway Arts Festival, in Dublin into the Dublin Theatre Festival, and into Cork into the Midsummer's Festival. And at the same time, you use those parks to have big visual pieces of art. And at the time when we're in total lockdown, you can still leave those screens programmed to show images. So they become a beacon of culture, and to show the culture is still with us. It's in a slightly different paradigm. It will be back with us, but we don't have to lose a sense of it. So, and also I thought, as I do right now, because the country is back into the full lockdown, you know, film crews in Ireland are working up and down the country. So I thought the Abbey Theatre should become a film studio for the period of time that it can't be working as a theatre, having the public in. They could be filming, you know, full-scale productions of small productions with small casts with not too many people, so that they could be separated out and it could be done within the guidelines of COVID, but that they could continue to produce I hate the word product, but that essentially they could continue to produce work. And then my bigger idea was that we have a brand called Culture Ireland. That is our way of funding the arts abroad. And I thought that if we had hands across the nation and we got all the bodies to interact with each other, then you would take Culture Ireland and put it as a page on the RTE iPlayer. And Culture Ireland would give you both a radio station and a television station. And that could be contributed to globally. We've set up a minister for the diaspora, and the Irish government have realised that the biggest strength of Ireland at the moment is its global reach, and the biggest way to reach the global reach is culture. So that you would take that product and create our own Sky Arts, our BBC4, and you put it into the iPlayer and you make it accessible. And that gives people a chance to continue to go to work, to produce, to be within the safe guidelines. It gives Irish people culture at the highest calibre, which is what we are so densely rich in. And it allows things to walk until we are in better shape to run again, which will come. But we cannot let it all dissipate. And people are, you know, there's some extraordinary things happening in Ireland in terms of people finding a pathway. But I wrote this paper in April because I didn't think there was any question of us having to cancel all sorts of things for the rest of the year. And I wanted to find a way where we could continue that experience for the public, because what is art if it can't meet its public? You know, that's my guidance as a producer and as an actor. You do the best possible preparation. You put in the best possible elements. But if you do it all and nobody sees it, or nobody has the opportunity to experience it, then what is it for? And if it does its job, which I think after we come through a period of this pandemic and people can access culture again, I think I am going to need to transcend all my concerns that have, you know, dogged our existence for all of this year. And I'm going to want to go out for the evening, and I'm going to want to be able to leave my worries to one side, and I'm going to want to be entertained, or I'm going to want to have an experience that will transcend all of this loss that we have collectively experienced this year.
Excellent, Alison. I just want to touch on one thing before we wrap up. And I was thinking that there might be people tuning in who don't know you, but find your voice familiar. And I know your voice is showing up in a lot of places now through various kinds of voiceover work. It's a new venue, and it can be done remotely. How is that going, and where should we hear you?
Yeah, so my antithesis to producing, which is working with lots and lots of people, whether it's St. Bridget's Day for London, which I created with the Irish Embassy here, which has really taken off globally for the Department of Foreign Affairs, I'm delighted to say. My antithesis to that is recording audiobooks. So I've been a regular reader for Penguin Random House, for Audible, for other companies. And funnily enough, I had a great year with it last year, long before the pandemic. I was recording Anne Enright and some wonderful new Irish young adult books and some history books. So that was very exciting. So when the pandemic hit this year, I got requests to see if I could home record, and that required a bit of embracing tech, John, which would not be my strongest suit. But I realized that I could stand on my side of the door and not walk through those doors. And I could sit and wait for the pandemic to pass. Or I could be very brave, kind of go, I can learn this if I have the right guidance and people to help me and tech people to help me. I can learn it and I will give it a go. So this summer, Ethnos Shorthall has a wonderful book that's out in America called Three Little Truths, published by Penguin Random House, was my first big home recording. And I'm not going to lie, it was terrifying. Her work is wonderful. I recommend it to all your listeners to have a listen to it. It's a terrific book. But was I daunted by it? I was absolutely daunted by it. Did I feel a huge sense of achievement when it was all delivered to Penguin? I can't tell you how relieved I was. And after that, I've continued to do more. And now I have a little home recording set up, and I do voiceovers, and that's what's keeping me busy.
That's what really shines through in this particular conversation is kind of your multifaceted approach towards the arts. And that's a conversation that I believe is kind of really productive for Irish communities, both to hear and embrace. And so I'd like to thank you, for putting that out there. And John, feel free to drop in.
Absolutely. I echo what Martin just said. The passion came through, the commitment and the belief came through very strongly. And, Martin and I are kind of jumping in on this global opportunities in a way and hopefully we're doing our small part for Irish culture and connectivity. And you're a great example of that sort of global Irish citizen, a global Irish nation citizen, because you do have those perspectives from various countries.
Well, I think that it's the economic downturn that's very often led me to a big move geographically. Mm-hmm. And I think I was lucky enough to come through Ireland at a time when there was a halcyon period of funding of the arts, when I managed to get a lot of experience. And Frank McGuinness said to me that when I moved to America, if I got asked to do something, I was just to say yes. And I spent most of my career saying no. And I've discovered that saying yes has turned out to be really enjoyable. I love creating things. I love working with people, and I like people to be shown in the best possible light. So if I'm involved in something as a producer, I'll set up the framework so that people can work to the best of their ability. And thankfully that so came together in the Centenary of 1916 for New York. And I know that has gone down hugely well in the annals of Irish memories for New York. It was a wonderful day when, the rock concert, the commemoration ceremony, PRA and the 4 floors of culture that I was lucky enough to get to program. And, I was a small part in that. I was their consultant producer, but I think there were 270 people working on the day, and it was led by Barbara Jones and the consulate and PRA, which was the venue in Battery Park. It's a really beautiful building. So it's the last surviving historic pier in New York City, and it was built as the Department of Docks in the late 19th century. But by the 1990s, it had been totally abandoned. And in 2009, an Irishman called Danny MacDonald, under his guidance, it was restored. And it's now a wonderful multi-floored series of bars and restaurants, and they have indoor and outdoor performance spaces. So that became the venue for April 24th. And the use of the space on the day and the days leading up to it, when all the preparations were made possible by the extraordinary and generous sponsorship of Danny MacDonald. And I worked with him and Anthony Malone and their team, and they were just brilliant. So what a gift they gave to the Irish community.
It was a great day, and you find yourself in the epicenter of Ireland in New York, and I guess now appearing on Irish Stew would be up there as probably your next career highlight.
You know, I've absolutely thoroughly enjoyed being invited to be part of this and the chat with you today. This isn't something I do very often, and I was quite nervous about it, but you've been really welcoming, and I've loved it. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alison. Until our paths cross again, for real.
Thank you.
Okay. Take care.
Hey, it was really great for me to hear from Alison McKenna, who's a friend of mine, but I learned an awful lot that I didn't know about and found it all really interesting. And I see her as a global Irish nation success story with two words jumping out for me. The first is, Martin, I'm not sure if this is a word you use in Ireland, but gumption. To keep yourself open to opportunities, you capitalize on lucky breaks. You force the issue in your favor. From that story when she was with the director of the National Theatre in London, and he said the standard, "We'll be in touch," and she fired back with "typical," and that's what won her the role. And the other word that comes up would be balance. Pursuing acting, but not at the expense of her education, developing skills in the business world that would come in handy later, embracing the role of producer in the theater, and then using those skills to develop original cultural programming, and then keeping your hand in the acting game with the latest way to do so, voiceover artist and audiobook recorder.
Yeah, John, this is clearly a lady that doesn't like to be pigeonholed. So I was kind of really impressed by how Alison deals with the struggles that every person that operates within the performing arts industry has to deal with. This is uncertainty. So not only does she act on the stage, in movies and TV, but she also kind of leveraged her rather mundane job in a drinks business to develop business schools, which she then turned around and used to basically establish a successful production company. And so having that degree of flexibility, a willingness to kind of switch roles, no pun intended, from actor to producer has enabled Alison to probably avoid the downside of being a working member of the performing arts, which means long gaps of unemployment. So embracing diversity of skills, that's a lesson that anybody can take away from this particular interview. And I really enjoyed speaking with her.
Yeah, she made a mention once to me about not wanting to be a starving artist. Didn't appeal to her. And then just one other thing, Martin, I thought the passion really came through at the end when she started talking about how performing artists can respond to the COVID crisis. This is something she's really been thinking about, working on, trying to keep the arts alive during very trying times.
Yeah, I agree. A special lady.
Thanks for joining us for another Global Irish Nation conversation. To see what we're stirring up next, follow us on Twitter at Irish Stewcast or like us on Facebook at Irish Stew Podcast. And you're very welcome to join Martin Nutty and me, John Lee, anytime for another serving of Irish Stew.
Irish Stew is produced by John Lee, Martin Nutty, and Bill Schultz. Editing, mixing, and mastering by Bill Schultz. Music on Irish Stew was composed and performed by Rosa Nutty, with Donald Bowens on drums, Cathal O'Riordan on bass and synthesizer. For more on Rosa Nutty's music, please visit rosanutty.com.